Hello and welcome to Unplugged, an IoT podcast where we dive deep into the world of automation and IoT. I'm your host, Phil Seboa.
G'day, Phil, and hi everyone. I'm Ed Fuentes. Well, Phil, what a special episode this one is. We're actually joined by two, I think, icons in the manufacturing space here in Australia, Shane Williams and Paul
Mason.
Mason. Sorry, Paul.
That's all right.
Shane, I should have kept it like that. And we're going to have an interesting conversation around digital transformation and especially where we play in the OT space. Both Paul and Shane play in that IT space, and I think we're going to have a lot of knowledge share today.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good conversation, just crossing the boundaries between OT and IT, highlighting some of the challenges around enterprise resolution, people management, technology, and the bridge in between. So I think it's a really good opportunity just to kind of talk about some of those challenges that we all face, and especially here in Australia, because this is our local stomping ground. This is us, an opportunity for us to tell the global audience a bit more about Australian manufacturing and some of the challenges that we face locally, because we're a geographically vast system, and we have lots of enterprise sites that are really diverse in their nature. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation today.
Mate, that was a massive build-up. I hope we're living up to expectations now. You got a couple of blokes from a manufacturing podcast on here. Let's hope we can deliver to that large setup. Thanks for having us on the show, mate.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, in that case, Shane, let's kick off with you guys. What is it that Manufacturing Tech Australia podcast delivers to industry? And cheers, by the way.
Yeah, we should mention that. Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, cheers. I can kick that off if you like. So, firstly, I love this idea of collaboration. We've been chatting about doing a podcast together for ages now, and we're like, come on, let's just get this done. But Shane and I are always talking about collaboration, business to business, and now there's not enough of it in Australia. So I thought we'd set the benchmark here and do a bit of B2B collab in the podcast space. So it's great to chat with you guys. But yeah, Shane and I, I'm from manufacturing background, mechatronics engineer, more around design, innovation, and commercialization of products at the moment. But Shane's background's more in IT. So when we came together with the IT, OT, thought we'd get together and throw out a podcast on manufacturing tech. So it's been we're on the third season now, so having fun.
Yeah, Shane, how are you finding, the road of launching a podcast that now you're in 3 seasons? It's like you're a seasoned veteran almost in that space.
Well, it's an interesting one, right? So it feels like when we started out, it was a bit of context, go back a little while. This is my second podcast. I had two years of a previous one in a previous life. So this is year 5 of podcasting, and it feels like that journey goes from it's a niche that no one really knows much about to every second person you meet's got a podcast. And so now it's about, well, how do you deliver real value? I mean, a lot of people, I think, are just getting out there and just having a crack, which is great. But I think if you want to really add value, and that was always our vision, right? It was, we don't go out there and go, hey, we're Paul and Shane and we sell services. It's all about how do we give back? How do we educate? How do we bring, technology concepts to folks who haven't got every day to think about it? And so that was the antithesis of it. And now, 3 years in, that journey's been really cool. I mean, you think about, unlike Paul, didn't have a manufacturing background, right? I was on the periphery of it with years at News Corp, given that we had printing facilities and distribution and things like that, but never hardcore manufacturing. And so to come into that world, and for me, a podcast is an opportunity to go and find really smart people who know about shit in the industry and go, hey, I don't know. I know I don't know. So fill me in on the gaps. What do I need to know, and what's cool and what's different, and how do things work? And that's been a really fascinating journey. And the beauty of that is I get to be the guy who asks the dumb questions on behalf of the folks listening who go, oh, gee, that's really handy that Shane can go and seek out those people and ask those questions on my behalf. So that's really what keeps us going, is that constant desire to learn and share.
Yeah, very similar vibe there, Shane, with Phil and I, that definitely bringing those specialists that are out there, especially in our space, the OT space. There's so much changing. I'm assuming it's the same for you as well. The technology is evolving. It's very difficult to get access to information in an easy way, but Phil and I managed to get a few specialists on board, asking those questions exactly like you mentioned, and guiding us as we learn, and hopefully our listeners as they learn on that digital transformation journey, which is quite a big topic, I suppose, and that's probably the reason why we're here today, is to talk through that and what the different perspectives are from your perspective in that space that you play in, and what we're seeing, and hopefully derive some value together.
Yeah. I mean, the trouble with digital transformation, right? I feel like the word's been done to death to the point where no one really even knows what it means anymore, right? And there's ask 10 people at a conference, and you get 10 different answers, and some people will go right down into, I put sensors on stuff, right through to, it's an ERP. And you're like, well, it could be anywhere in the middle, right? So I'm really looking forward to this conversation where we can kind of explore, we're probably not even going to scratch the surface, but if we kind of explore a couple of different angles on it, and we might make sense of it for someone listening. So that's my hope anyway.
No, it definitely is, a challenging one. We'll probably have 4 different perspectives just even here in this podcast. But, when I think about digital transformation, it's really about, the leverage of data to really further your business forward, right? It's about capturing data, it's about analyzing data, it's about utilizing data and seeing it as the value driver for your business. I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, Paul, what have you thought around that?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking, maybe a couple of quick definitions around it, because we throw around digital transformation, digitization, Industry 4. Is it the same thing? Is it completely different? Who knows? I guess from my perspective, and like you say, everyone's got a different perspective, but Industry 4 for me is that kind of umbrella concept of, smart sensors and AI and digital twins and all these kind of cool technologies that fall under that umbrella, but not necessarily even just the technologies, the business models behind them and the stuff where all the smart things come from. I guess digitization, on the other hand, is just that transfer of processes and systems from the paper base, to a digital version, which in itself doesn't add all that much value usually. And then you've got the digital transformation. And digital transformation really is that broader strategic journey where you're looking big picture, looking at a long-term strategy, using all these tools and systems to really add value to the business, do things that make your customer happy, and deliver that kind of big picture for the future that makes a business more resilient.
See, that's an interesting one, right? I have this kind of aversion to just using the word digital transformation, because I feel like we immediately, as technologists do, go straight into what are the toys? Right? It's this and it's that and it's all these things, and it's cool that we can create data, and you're like, as a GM or an MD or a business owner, I'm like, so effing what? Right? And like, what's the and? And I think it's the and which is, probably going to be the point that I keep harping on, which is like, yeah, this is really cool. And like the person who's paying the bill, what does it mean for them? And I reckon that's probably honestly where a lot of business owners just glaze over and go, yeah, that all sounds too hard. Like, move on. I'll just get on with same old, because transforming feels hard and I don't really understand what you're talking about. It just sounds like you want to buy shit.
Yeah, the transformation aspect is quite an interesting one, because we've been, as far as business are concerned, they're always transforming. That's what their nature is, from whatever they were doing from a product point of view, or maybe the way they extend their supply network. There's transformation happening. So in a business, Shane, let me ask you this question. Where should it start if they're digitally transforming? How does it kick off?
So I've got a couple of perspectives on this one. One is kind of driven by this kind of personal agenda that I'll park for a second, but I think just more broadly, if we're having a conversation around why should I do a digital transformation, or what does it mean, or you're trying to pick that apart, I steer away from the conversation altogether and go like, what would fundamentally change this business for the better? What would need to happen? And you go, we would need to be able to, I don't know, get better at delivering products on time, or we would need to be able to be more efficient in the way that we do it so we can reduce our costs because we've got razor thin margins. And we start to unpick some of those things, and you go, okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about OEE, are we talking about equipment efficiency, or are we talking about DIFOT? What does it mean? What's the driver that the business could see a material benefit from, that's going to reduce their operational cost and improve their margin, or it's going to make sure that customer satisfaction goes up because that means that you can keep other competitors at bay, or what's the dial that the business owner could genuinely go, if I could get that, then the investment makes sense. And if we can figure out what that looks like, that needs to be the starting point, which then you pull the threads of, well, how do we get there? Which then boils down to, well, if we were to change a process and put some technologies in and do these things, you could get that outcome. And they go, okay, now I see the picture. I get what I'm going after. I reckon the obvious ones are OEE and DIFOT, but we could probably argue and debate either side of that argument.
And how's that different from continuous improvement?
I don't think it is, but I think the difference is continuous improvement feels like you never get there, and it's the never-ending game, right? Whereas someone goes, if I give you $10, I want $20 in return. And if you go, yeah, you'll get it one day. Yeah, well, that doesn't help me, right? Like, well, you keep tipping $10 in, and one day you'll get some return. Like, no. I kind of want to see if this, then that. I think a lot of business owners kind of get that. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do continuous improvement, but I think it's sometimes harder to put the tangible, what am I getting out of this investment piece around it.
Yeah, it's a great point where you're, drawing the line in the sand, right? And you're doing that transformation. You're becoming the butterfly at the end of the process. So it's a really good point to actually, say that digital transformation is this massive change or a substantial effort to make a change within your business so that you can see that end result.
Phil, you're in this stuff sort of every day, advising businesses around, on that journey, how do they transform? I'm just curious, what are you seeing as those drivers? What are people asking for, or, what problems are they trying to solve that's really driving that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a few different aspects really, and it's actually from big businesses going from, not having continuous traceability within their systems, so having very siloed operations, right down to just the fact that they are still using pen and paper in the plant floor to aggregate their data, but they're not seeing the continuity of data validation, and that's one of the biggest drivers for them to do the digitization of those processes, and then the connectivity portion starts to come in, and they start looking at those technology kind of gaps within their architectures. So usually that's one of the main drivers, is just actually continuity and quality type aspects, because every supervisor out there has to do some sort of reporting mechanism, and usually it's either a spreadsheet or it's something that they've had to cobble together or ask a few people about, and it's really about giving them access to that data in real time so that they're not having to do some heavy data manipulation or just verification. Most of their day is spent just chasing down someone who's got this piece of information that they need to then report on. So usually that's the kind of trigger for most people on the plant floor, is just trying to reduce that overhead, try and get real-time data. That's really the biggest driver from my side.
And is that coming from the guys on the floor really wanting to, I guess, digitize and make that easier for themselves? Or is that coming from, guys up the chain that are saying, we want better visibility on what's going on, we want to see the issues, we want to track it? Or is it a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both. The pain point is there for the business, right? It's a management driver from a KPI level. They're trying to manage people at the end of the day, and they're trying to get a good understanding of what the health of their business is. And so if they can't get access to the data in a good time, because usually, these reports are done either weekly, monthly, and depending on the speed of their processes, that could mean that their data is already out of date by the time the guy has even collected it. So it's a real pain point at the moment for most manufacturers out there, is just having access to that real-time data, just so that they can get a good understanding of where they're at in the process.
And just adding to that, Paul, what we find as well in that space is the amount of disparate data that exists on an OT layer, from data that sits on a legacy device, because a lot of those production plants, and you've probably seen a lot of them, they evolve too, but they never get rid of the old stuff. The old stuff still hangs around, and then they buy some new stuff, and then they try to integrate it, and sometimes they don't even integrate it. They're just sitting on as islands. So you have this issue where you've got legacy data, different disparate databases. As Phil was mentioning, about getting real-time data is very difficult. It's a challenge. So they really have to know what technology exists, what's available to fix it. And we find that a challenge for them. And not the other data point is, of course, paperwork. When we talked about digitization before, you mentioned how moving from paper to paperless, it seems, and it should be easy, but it's not. It's difficult because once again, the digitization platform might be another data source they're using, another disparate data source. And that lack of integration. Now the production managers want to get real-time visibility. They get yesterday's news.
So Ed, that might be a good segue into your sweet spot, which is really that integration piece. So why don't you talk us through a little bit about the tools that people are using? How are people consolidating all this structured and unstructured data? Are they data laking? What are they doing to sort of pull it into one spot and get it back out the other end again?
Oh, that's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
Getting it into one spot. You're right. But when we talk about digital transformation, and especially in our field, we talk about it, and you've mentioned this, Shane, as well. And Paul, it's a journey, it's a strategy. It's not, you don't say, I'm now digitally transformed. It's a continual process of the journey you're on, but with a goal. And that goal that's an important question to solve. But when we talk about digital transformation, there's 4 very basic key elements that we encourage people to think about. First of all, is to connect to every intelligence you can. So the idea is that you want to be able to connect to legacy devices, all databases, all infrastructure, even people, if you can, through that digitization process, to connect to as much intelligence as you can and collect the data. And in collecting the data, it's not about just storing it in some random location, but giving it context. And Phil and I talk about the importance of giving data context, giving it meaning, turning it to real-time information. So the technologies out there that exist that can connect to all this intelligence, collect the information, start storing it, we all know that how much storage costs have come down over the last 10 or 15 years. I remember my first computer when I bought in the 90s was 16 kilobytes of memory. Now you're getting terabytes of data for so cheaply to store. So it's memory and storing data is not expensive. But then once you connect and collect, you can start analyzing and visualizing. So they're like the 4 key primary steps of any of these processes. So choosing a platform is not so much which platform, it's about what is my current infrastructure look like? What do I have that I have to connect to? How do I collect the data? What does it look like from a semantic point of view? How do I make sense of it? So if anyone looks at it, they can make sense of it by just looking at a structure of information. And that's the challenge for a lot of people, especially in our space, because they're dealing not so much with new stuff that talks easily, but some of this old stuff. The protocols that live on them are so old that to get data out of them is very difficult. They have to maybe upgrade the hardware, which is always expensive to do, or they can have third-party connectors, and it's quite a dance to do it. And that's what Phil does in his consulting gig, to look at this sort of environment. How do we make it as easy as possible to collect? Because eventually they'll buy new machines, eventually they'll buy new hardware that has to also be able to fit into the whole ecosystem you're building out. So there's some key things we discussed through that process.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Ed, because normalizing that data, that's the biggest challenge for any sort of integration type project, is that you have to kind of take all those disparate systems. They might be flat JSON, they might be text files, they could be an Allen Bradley PLC or a Honeywell PLC or whatever your technology stack was, 10 years ago that you're still collecting data on. You have to reach into that system, try and normalize the data in some way so then it's accessible and you can actually transport it to the rest of the business. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we really face in that sort of consultancy space, is just trying to identify what technologies are out there. And we're in that technology space, so we generally go there, but that's one of the the challenges as well, is just trying to unlock who knows where the data is and what context is around that data. So that's some of the biggest challenges there.
And in your space there, Paul and Shane, when you I know, Paul, you worked as a mechatronic engineer, you got some idea what happens at plant floor. But when it comes to the shop, to the top floor, that IT layer, how important or critical is that clean data coming from the shop floor?
Well, I think that's an interesting one, right? That's where I was about to pull up and go, hey, lads, let's go back to the so what question, right?
Yeah.
And so I think maybe to make this real or tangible for people, we should go to like not a case study, but let's play that out, right? So, I'm not going to name the industry, but I'm working with an organisation at the moment, and their products can be produced, shipped on the retail shelf, and sold before the folks running the business, so the CEO, before the CEO can even tell you that production has started. Right? Now, to answer your question about what's the value of that and all the rest of it, well, geez, maybe just to know that we're making stuff would be a good start. Maybe to know how much stuff we've made, and are we making to order or to stock, and what's the stock look like, and do I have more capacity could I be selling more because I don't know how much capacity I've got? And in some instances, there's literally businesses going like, the factory runs entirely independent of the office, and they could have the best stuff. And in this particular business, they've got some good stuff. They've got like a really recent implementation of Ignition, and they've got brand new production lines that have been put in. But no one thought about the last mile, right? So what? We've got all this stuff and we can produce things. Oh, don't worry about the guy paying the bill down the road. Stuff him. We'll figure it out later, right? Well, how am I going to fund more investment to do more things if I don't know what value I'm getting out of the investment that I've already got? I can't see what's happening, and I can't predict or forecast, and therefore I can't change my behavior around selling more or buying more input product, or what does that need to look like? So I think that's the value for the back office, is trying to go, I don't care about to the level of, is it a PLC and how did you get the data and what lake did you put it in? I care about the so what, which is how do I take that information and make decisions based on it?
I want to sort of add a bit of a lean manufacturing bent on that too, because if we sort of go back a step instead of jumping straight into this technology, some of the good manufacturers I work with, they're like, okay, firstly, what do we actually want to measure? What do we want to see? And instead of sort of jumping in and grabbing all that data and start extracting insights out of it all, they go, right, let's start with one thing. What's most important? Is it OEE, or is it downtime or quality? Depending on what that is, they start with one. They draw it up on a whiteboard and they figure out what all this stuff is in the analog world before they even start to digitize it. And I think that's like a good approach, so that you're sort of not spinning your wheels, and even do it incrementally. I know we talk a lot about pilot purgatory and people running trials and pilots forever and never getting anywhere, but I think there is some value in running some small things where you can actually see those quick wins.
Yeah, I think in terms of strategy there, you can really just identify your top 5 items that you think, or questions that you would ask, right? Usually we have people in a room and just, try and get them to talk to each other and then kind of role play your day to day. What does the supervisor walk down to the plant floor and ask on a day to day basis? If you can solve those 5 questions, you at least save him the 20 meters of stairs that he has to come down and back up again. So, that's immediate value straight away. So you can start having those conversations with those upper management teams. Then they start leveraging, like, as you said, these systems already exist, right? Most of the time they're collecting data. They just don't know where it is. And so, just having those conversations at those management levels to just identify where the value is, 100% agree with that, because then you can start driving those technology questions to then start returning that value back up the chain. They may have already done those types of processes just to keep the plant floor running, but there's a lot of data there that can be mined.
It's interesting you say that, Phil, and the journey that people are on, because this idea of data and collecting and bringing information up to the boardroom to make better information, it's not as if it's new. We've been able to do this for a long time. So what in your minds has caused? Look, there's no doubt that with today's technology, I'm going to say this, it's cheaper to do, I think, but the technology makes it more easier to do. But what has been the cause of people not to? Or what's the hurdles?
I reckon it's two things. One is the historical assumption that it costs too much, without actually diving into necessarily what that cost looks like. And the extension of that is, what's my business case that goes with it? Like, I can't articulate what that is. The IT and the OT guys now can't necessarily agree, or the back office and the front office can't figure out what that value chain looks like. I think the second one is that in larger businesses, not the SME space, but in the larger ones where there is an IT team and there is let's call it an OT team for lack of a better term, but like typically it's engineering or someone out on the factory floor. It's that we come from two different worlds. We don't want to play in the same sandpit, and it's rather than having the conversation about who owns what and how can we help each other out, it's guns at 10 paces. No, you shall not touch my stuff, and vice versa. And so there's this fundamental disconnect philosophically around who owns what. Trying to build a bridge between two countries that don't want to talk to each other is never going to happen, right? And it's the same here.
It's also a financial reporting type conversation, right? Usually it's whose budget is this coming out of?
I think it's interesting you were saying the other day, Shane, that people are putting aside all this cash for AI. Let's put 50 or 100K in the budget next year for AI implementation with no idea what they're going to do with it. But we seem to struggle so much, and I think OT more so than IT. But IT traditionally has struggled. How many businesses do you know that still don't have an ERP? They're still running spreadsheets and things. It's insane.
Yeah.
So I think it's a struggle on the IT and the OT. But I think also the how these tools are transforming, and this comes down to the stuff that you guys are working in, Ed and Phil. The tools now in the factory floor feel like IT tools. They've got beautiful dashboards and their user interfaces that you never had before. So I feel that's coming a long way in terms of sort of solving that difficulty barrier, I think, for implementation.
Yeah, a lot of the conversations are around education, mostly. It's like, what are the capabilities of these products that are on our plant floor? Mm-hmm. Because most of the IT team have never, seen a particular SCADA platform, or they don't understand what the capabilities are of it. Maybe it can run reports, maybe it can give me the information that I need to make these decisions. But usually they just don't have that conversation, right? It goes unsaid. The OT guys keep the keys to the kingdom on their side, and the IT is similar as well. So yeah, just having those conversations, trying to articulate the capabilities of the plant floor is one of those challenges.
I reckon where I've seen it, it's almost like there's the executive mandate to do something that breaks down that barrier, because all of a sudden we're forced to get in a room and talk to each other. Then you always end up with there's a couple of techies who realise all of a sudden you might be an IT and I might be an OT, but actually if we could just get in a room and let our guard down for a minute, we could just nerd out on some shit, and then it'll be really cool and fun and we'll work some stuff out, right? But it typically takes something to happen that forces that conversation, which means that the budget problem goes away, or the I don't care whose sandpit we're playing in problem goes away, because there's something more pointed that's important. And the classic case is there's a product recall on some food and bev thing, right? And they're doing their analysis of like, well, where did this go pear-shaped? And they're like, oh, well, no, we've got all the reports from the temperature testing, this, that, and the other. And then eventually someone goes, nah, we've been audited this many times. It can't be there. It's got to be back in the food chain. And eventually you go picking. And eventually someone goes, hang on, I've just been down the factory floor. Someone's done all the temperature tests for the next 6 days. How did that happen? You're right. Because it's a process where someone's got to sit there and do something manually and write it in a book. And they're like, I just get there on Monday morning and I fill out all the numbers for the week, and then I don't have to worry about it until it blows up. And all of a sudden, oh, hang on, no, well, we can't have someone filling in a book and making stuff up anymore. We actually need some sort of technology that solves this problem. And the only way we can get that data to where it needs to be is that you two fellas need to get in a room and talk to each other. And all of a sudden, oh, actually, you know what? We don't dislike each other that much, and we can figure this out. And all of a sudden, bang, you get a solution, right?
Shane, you've just blown the whistle on a whole bunch of work for next week. These guys are going to be pretty upset. Managers will be checking the paperwork, making sure they're not filling out in advance. But I've seen it happen as well. I've seen it in food and bev. It's interesting. But you're right. It's a fall down of the process more than anything.
Yeah,
it's not a lack of technology. technology's been there for a long time. I think the reasons to change have been there, whether they've been, maybe they're too high level. Is there a need for companies, do you think, that have to bring in third-party people to help guide them? Or is there enough information in the business to, like you meant, not go to pilot purgatory, as you mentioned, but to move to actual, get those small wins? Is difficult to say because small wins are so subjective. A production manager wants to get real-time data. The sales guy wants to know when his stock's going to be delivered. And the quality guy wants to make sure that no one's doing the dodgy with the paperwork. So what does a small win look like? And do you think they need, or do they get value of third-party help, or can they do it in themselves, or do they need education? I think you mentioned, Phil, it's an issue. I'm just so conscious that I want to see all our manufacturers win.
And I don't think there's one answer, right? Like all the things you just said is yes, and depending on the business, right? Some of them have got spare capacity, and someone who's got the inclination to just go and ask all the why questions until they figure stuff out and go, oh, we could do this ourselves. There's other businesses where they go, I actually, you know what? Me being the silo of information and nobody else knowing anything keeps me in a job and makes me important. So I don't want to share this stuff, and therefore no one's plugging anything in. And there's a million reasons, from I don't want to spend the money to I don't see the value to who knows, right? So all the things you just said, the answer is yes, depending on the business. And that's the biggest challenge, right? There's no one answer.
So it could be potentially summed up in business culture, leadership, all those kind of overarching things that need to be there as that kind of solid rock to sort of keep the rest of the business ticking over to make all those other things happen and make them a bit easier.
It's probably it comes back to the why and the impetus for change, right? Like, does somebody have an inclination to do something? And
is there a shining light out there, Shane, that you've seen, or Paul, that you've seen?
I could tell you about, well, just last week I seen a business, and I think it's a good example of every business, one solution doesn't fit every business, and every business, it seems, in Australia is so completely different. Because a few years ago, if you were custom writing your own software, everyone would just think you're crazy. Like, how are you ever going to keep it up to date and keep it secure, and all these issues that you have with this custom stuff? But these guys have done an amazing job and I've seen a couple of these businesses actually. They come from IT backgrounds. They go and buy a manufacturing business, and then they start to manage processes and workflows and map it all out and run it like run it so smoothly. Apply all those kind of IT principles over the top. Once they sort of systemize the whole thing, they start to automate, they start to digitize, and it can be sort of applied to any industry. But I guess fundamentally at the end of the day, it's not just about that manufacturing for these smart businesses. It's about, both sides of that manufacturing smiley curve that I've spoken about before. You've got to be not just making things smartly in the manufacturing part, but you've got to have your sales and marketing and your branding on point at one end, and then on the other one, you've got to be developing new and innovative products that are staying ahead of everybody else. And in some cases, that's just a really smart business model that might be as simple as change from B2B to B2C so that you can be competitive and make money. So I think there's lots of things in there. But at the end of the day, I think that comes down to a business strategy and lots of different elements within that to make a successful business.
And you made the comment before, right? And I think I was saying this the other day. So I walked into an organization and talking about the tech strategy. And right, well, what does our roadmap look like for the next couple of years? And it comes into budgets and it comes into priorities and all the rest of it. And it was like, well, we probably need to spend some money on, getting this data out of this platform over here and bringing it into the lake so that you can start to report on it. Oh, what's that going to cost? That sounds expensive. And I go, hang on, you just spent the last 10 minutes telling me you want to drop 20 grand next year on AI, and you couldn't explain for what. And when I go, you got to spend some money over here to give you the data that if you don't have it, the AI is useless, and you go, oh, that's expensive. And it's this perception of value. I'll spend money on a thing I don't even understand because because the market says it's the latest thing and it's going to solve all my problems. But I don't understand the value of the core thing. And that brings me to the topic of AI, right? This is the buzzword. So my guess is you fellas are seeing this happening in the market in terms of the OT tools, right? It's not just, hey, can we bolt AI onto your ERP or Copilot into your mailbox and, you know, the basic stuff. What's going on? I'm really curious. Sorry, I'm just distracting the conversation to a different angle now, but I'm really curious. What are you seeing in terms of AI and ML, machine learning, for the people who don't know what I'm talking about, in terms of what it means for IoT?
Well, I can tell you that automation and that landscape have been doing ML for, decades, algorithms forever, whether that's, just managing power consumption, that's, mean time to failure type calculations, trying to, do predictive maintenance, some performance indicators. All those types of things are like nicely bundled into those ML type applications, but I guess they're becoming more distributed as well. So, we're seeing edge capability on the advance. So that might be a camera on the line doing image recognition for quality control. That could be, just simple Python type libraries being distributed into IoT devices. So something as small as a microcontroller, just doing basic reporting type mechanisms that they can transport into the larger ecosystem. So that might be temperature out at the edge and just managing spikes in temperature and then alerting people out to the edge, from the edge all the way up through the stack. So there are those types of micro AI, edge AI cases that we're seeing, OT software vendors starting to come into the picture. There are some IT tools being transported down. There's Edge Impulse, which collects at the edge and then transports that into the cloud. So then we can start moving it back down again, and we start leveraging these big, ecosystems of compute power. So there are lots of different facets of AI. We're seeing more a trajectory of using MCP servers as well, moving forward, so that we can start, transforming the data, embedding MCP servers. So that's Model Context Protocol for everyone, and so that's something that we're seeing a sort of direction going into. And what that means for AI is that we can start bridging those LLMs, large language models, leveraging MCP servers to start doing task-orientated and agentic type ecosystems. So, dividing those big workflows down to micro tool sets, that IT type application where they're reaching into your email box. It may not be the email box that they're leveraging. It may be a spreadsheet on the plant floor that is being manually updated. And when that update happens, we can distribute it to the rest of the ecosystem. So those micro interactions, those edge type applications, they're all starting to creep in, but they're very low cost as well. I think that's something that it kind of gets blown into proportion, but we can't do it without the ecosystem, without the infrastructure as well. So that's what I'm kind of seeing there in the OT landscape at the moment.
Yeah, to your point, Phil, just adding to that, I think that's the part that I find very important. There are lots of low cost, almost freemium products you can buy out there or get out there to help you in your AI ML journey. Connect to this sensor, connect to this data point. We'll give you some dashboards, give you some value. But they all seem to live in their own ecosystem, and it's hard either to get data out of them or to connect to them, to integrate to them. So I find a lot of companies who've tried machine learning, like they've tried vibration monitoring system, maybe 10 of them they've tried across their site. They haven't worked. They have not achieved the success they wanted to, the promises of, and we're all guilty of, the AI company guilty of the silver bullet. You use AI and it will solve all your problems without realizing that there's a lot of work to be done before you implement AI. The basic question you mentioned, Shane, why? what am I doing this for? Why am I going to spend 50,000 or whatever it might be on AI project without knowing the why? And then as you develop it, so the whole idea is that you build infrastructure, I think anyway, as in data infrastructure, normalization, contextualizing the data, putting it in a nice, neat way into some sort of database so that AI and ML can have the best chance of success. But even then, it's not successful. I worked for a bearing company for a while, and we had the best vibration monitoring analysis you could get. We'd do my vibration, we'd do a full report, indicating this bearing is going to die in the next 6 months. We lay the report down with the maintenance people, and you know what happens, right? Nothing. So typically, we just have to run the paint. We have to run production. Production is king, and that's fine. And then do I think that with an AI application saying, hey, you need to change the temperature setting over here or change that temperature sensor, whatever it might be, is the action going to happen? So it's not so much about the AI, and like Phil said, it's now ubiquitous. Everyone wants AI, but the premise is getting that nice, clean data set is not easy. It's a journey to do that too.
I think that, in the consumer space, where we use now chat GPTs and these kind of things, and we're getting, productivity improvements massively. And I think everyone is just thinking, well, why can't I get those same kind of productivity improvements in every other space of my business? Reality is just a lot harder, right? They're a lot more complex. There's a lot more moving parts. There's integration. There's even education. There's culture. There's so many different things. It's not just you interacting with the AI where you can sort of get that nice simple answer. It's much more complex in a manufacturing environment.
From an OT perspective, it's about risk management, right? Overall, like new technologies into and unknowns, they naturally bring higher risk profiles. So who wants to make a bet right now?
I've got an interesting one for you, lads, which is we're talking a lot about OT in the context of me making stuff, right? What about IoT and machine learning and AI models on within my products and the ability to then, I'm making this up, right? But I make a thing and traditionally I've sold it and it's been a capital asset and someone's then basically tried to squeeze as much juice out of that thing as they can for the next decade, right? Think about just as a manufacturer would buy a CNC and try and use it until it dies, right? And this is kind of a really broad, open question, but I'm thinking about the scenario where the manufacturer goes, you know what? These software guys have got it figured out. They stitch you up to buy a thing, and they're so ubiquitous in your business, you can't get rid of them, and they can just jack their prices up and bill you for the next decade or 20 years or whatever it is, right? And it's this kind of subscription model. And what about a world where we go to servitization, where I put an asset on your site, but I don't necessarily go, give me 150 grand up front to bolt this thing into your building. I go, you know what, pay me 10 grand a month for the next 25 years. And the value proposition is not that you're buying a thing and you're going to use it, but that you can produce widgets. And you can produce widgets any time of the day and night, 24 hours a day. And my job for 10 grand a month is to make sure that thing never breaks. And that comes back to Ed's earlier point about, well, if the bearing's going to fail, customer doesn't care anymore, right? I care because I've got to make sure that thing's maintained and it's upright, its uptime is happening. And all of a sudden I've got sensors and I've got machine learning and I've got all these algorithms and models running. My business model changes to deliver value to the customer who can then leverage that asset to do what they do. And it becomes a pay for service rather than a pay for asset model. Are you seeing businesses genuinely pick that opportunity up and run with it? And is it working?
I've seen it a few times. Working with some customers or manufacturers, like you mentioned, who thought about this that's a transformation. How do I change my business model from selling a product, like you mentioned, Shane, to selling
effectively a service,
a benefit, a service in a way? But we're still caught up in this mentality that if I buy something and pay a fee for it, my thinking is that it's going to get old. But the crux or the trick as well is to make the product better than when you first bought it. So that if I buy it today in 3 months' time when they download a new firmware upgrade or a new something, it is actually better. It's actually improved as I own it further. And I think that's the part we got to get through our mindset, or the people or the manufacturers building products. I'm building one at the moment, for example. They sell a particular product. I won't name it here, and they sell it as a one-off sale. But they're looking at changing the model because it consumes energy. This product. So they're thinking, how can I, with all the data I capture, sell the product maybe for a less price or as a service, but my focus is to reduce their energy bill based on the benefits I can help that product achieve over the lifetime of it. They've done calculations at how much energy it consumes over, let's say, 15, 20-year life cycle. So they're thinking, how do I make it better, keep it updated, and also show energy efficiencies for the company who buys it? So they now enter a different part of the supply chain or in the competitive nature. So those discussions are great discussions, and I'm seeing them happen, and they're thinking about infrastructure and how do they do that, especially with hardware. It's difficult because you know there are products that do get old, as mechanical products do. So then you think, how do I buy a mechanical product that I can also improve through firmware updates and firmware upgrades? So I've seen some of that happening and those discussions going on, but there is hardware out there that does get better. Well, Tesla, for example, is a good example. That it's a car you buy that only gets better the longer you own it.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. You know, Tesla is a kind of perfect example of, you know, the firmware that you get off the lot is not the last version of your car that you just purchased, right? So that's a really good one. You know, out of Europe, there are a lot of manufacturers starting to bring out more service-based agreements. So production as a service, manufacturing as a service. You see it with some of the big sort of egg producers. Like they have huge food and beverage type machinery that they export out of Europe, and they place it on your site, and you just run that production line, and they maintain it. They have on-site service people or on-call service people. They have, you know, 24/7 support type mechanisms for that particular manufacturing piece of the puzzle, because that's what you could do in the end of the day. You can spin up a factory pretty quick if you have all the puzzle pieces in place. We're also seeing some software vendors as well reach out and start doing these infrastructure as a service type models. So you can build, you know, SCADA that is off the shelf in the cloud type applications that you just have to maintain basically. And so the vendor might support that type of ecosystem. So you don't necessarily need to know all the cloud type technology. You just use it as a service, as a subscription as well. So that's totally out there. Everyone seems to be start to accept that. I think the biggest challenge is usually, you know, traditionally from a manufacturing point of view, is that when we buy something, we want to own it. I think that's been around forever. Right, so just relinquishing the fact that they don't own the manufacturing equipment that's a big leap for most manufacturers.
I think that yes, people used to do that a lot, so they could run their equipment into the ground and fully depreciate it. But I think these days, if you could run it off your OPEX instead of your CAPEX budget, I'm sure there'd be lots of manufacturers out there that'd be happy to do it. It got me thinking about, I've seen lots of sort of containerized solutions for all different applications, but I think probably one of the best ones is in recycling. I'm not talking about the cash for cans one, but that is probably a good example. You know, other like milk bottle recycling, things like that, where there's a company out there called Poppet. I'll shout out to them because they've got and they're not just about the technology, but about their innovative business model. Because where traditionally you need, $20 million for a big recycling plant, it's just not feasible anymore to cut, bits of plastic across the country. So decentralizing things where people can, where things can be made more locally, reduce that whole supply chain, reduce your costs there. And that doesn't just apply to recycling. It could be anything, any kind of small manufacturing, 3D printing. We've seen it with Speed 3D, all those kind of things as well. So I think those interesting business models coupled with really cool technology solving a real business problem is really interesting.
Yeah, I think any distribution of sort of that manufacturing process is only going to, affect your bottom line when it comes to logistics, right? We're seeing, those uplifts in that type of mechanism, trying to focus and decentralize all those activities that happen on a day-to-day basis, just because of we're seeing it more and more with tariffs and export and import costs, especially when your components come from here, there, and everywhere. If you can make something, or 3D print something on site, or even to the point bring that data center locally, because you want to have that infrastructure on site. There's pluses and minuses to that. So yeah, it's definitely something that we're definitely seeing some attention to.
Guys, do we want to wrap up with some, I don't know, future projections? What do we think is going to happen next 5-10 years? Something a bit juicy to leave the listeners with, where we think the industry is heading?
I don't know about leaving them with something in terms of where the industry is heading. I'm just reflecting on our conversation, going from the point of digital transformation, right? We've talked about digital transformation being someone's writing something on paper, and now we're just figuring out how to put a sensor in to figure that out. Right through to I'm putting IIoT into my product and I'm converting my entire business model over to service versus capital assets. And so when we go, what is digital transformation? You're like, oh, all that. Anywhere in the middle of that, that's what that is. Any wonder anyone listening goes, oh, I don't know what to do with this. Like, it all feels too hard, right? And then we go, what's the future got hold? And like, crikey, I don't know. I don't even know what the past has got, let alone where the future's going. But it feels like such a massive topic, which I think is why everyone struggles with it. And so I would love to talk about what do you see coming in terms of technology, but I think we just need to acknowledge for anyone who's sitting there who's been on this roller coaster with us for the last hour or so, just going, oh, that's a lot to just digest, let alone think about the future.
Well, I'll just jump back on my horse of product innovation and business model innovation, and which encompasses that whole thing about transformation overall. I think, like I keep saying, is those businesses that are going to be here in 10 years or 20 years time, because let's face it, it's not going to be very many that you see right now. Those ones are going to be the clever ones that are looking to innovate all parts of their business, not just their manufacturing, their design, their supply chains, everything, their people, their culture, to stay ahead of the next guy. So that's my little future prediction. Maybe you guys want to talk about the tech side.
Well, not just the tech side. I think we've had a really great conversation here, and what it leads to is strategy, right? Like, if you don't have a strategy, you can get lost. And I think that's 100%. I agree with Shane. If you haven't worked out your why by now, I think you're going to have to. Is probably the main point, right? Is because you're just going to get lost in the road mapping of it. So if you can work out your fundamentals, work out the top 5 things that you want to identify in your transformation journey, and start with there, then that's going to get you in a good trajectory. Just otherwise you're going to get lost. Ed?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people know that what they want. They sort of, I want real-time information, I want better visibility. And then the question is, the how, I think, is sometimes difficult for them to solve, is how do I do this? And to your point, Shane, how do I do this for the cheapest price I can, in their mentality sometimes, because they're happy to spend money on what they don't know what they're going to get, but when they sort of get the feeling, because I find that in our industry anyway, a lot of the OT team, they know what they needs to get fixed. And we talked about this other week, didn't we? That they struggle to get, I'm going to say this, the budget to do some small changes within their business. So what am I seeing? That I think the OT, I think that's getting better now. I think there is definitely a more push to support that the OT with their budgets, with not much budgets, but definitely with their projects, to achieve real-time data. And we always talk about, giving quick wins, real fast wins. Do a small, once they proof of concept, maybe proof of value, in the sense that, because today, especially in the software world, and Phil and I have seen a lot of this in the OT space, there's a lot of software you can use for a couple of hours or use for a day or 2 days. There's no charge to it. So to prove its viability to you, and the amount of information, and I'm going to talk about, definitely AI tools like ChatGPT and Claude and all those other ones that can help because they just know everything, right? So you ask the right question, how do I do this? And I'll recommend some platforms, I recommend how to do it. So you can get the value real quick. Now, whether you can scale or not, that's another question, but definitely get the value quickly to show off what's possible in a short amount of time. I think that starts to change the mentality of manufacturers saying, I can actually achieve this without much of an expenditure. And I like to think that's where we're going.
I think it's a really good way to, I guess, wrap up today's episode. Is, digital transformation. It's a journey. It's a strategy. It's a technology. It's a bit of everything, right? So I think, it's a really great conversation. I want to thank you guys for, coming on, shooting the breeze.
Likewise, thanks for sharing a drink with us and leaning into our space as well. We really appreciate that. The reflection I have on all of this is there's an opportunity here for folks on both sides of the fence, IT and OT, to lean in and go, what are the drivers that are happening on your side of the fence that would make your life easier, and how can we work together to figure that out, rather than that's not in my budget and I'm not interested. If you're in the OT side and you're like, hey, I know I need an investment in this thing and I just can't get anyone to see it, then think outside the box about what are the value drivers that are going to make the person who needs to make the decision agree with my conclusion. So you're coming from, I need to do a thing, what's the value that's going to provide up the chain? And the value for someone up the chain is is it time? Is it money? Is it status? Like, what's the thing that the person who needs to make the decision cares about, that you can go, this thing here will change this, will change this, will change this, and will give you that. And that's how you're going to build out the value stream. And then going back from the other side, which is, I'm a business owner and I'm like, well, what am I trying to achieve? Well, if it's OEE, then there's only one place to go and ask that question, right? It's not in the IT side, it's on the other side of the fence. Help me figure out this problem. Oh, well, if we did this, this, and this, we could give you that. Great. There's your investment solved, right? It's not that hard.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah. So yeah,
sorry, Paul.
No, I was just going to say thanks to you guys for coming on. I guess this is our inaugural manufacturing technology and IIoT happy hour. So
you couldn't even finish the sentence. We've only had one beer. What's going on?
I know. I completely lost for words. No, it's great to have you. It's great to do this, and like I said, in the spirit of collaboration of Aussie businesses, it's good we all get to have a chat, and I'm sure we'll do it again. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. I was going to encourage all our listeners as well that listen to us to highly encourage them to check out Manufacturing Tech Australia podcast. They're in their third season. They meet and talk to lots of Australian businesses and manufacturers through their journey. It's well worth a listen. Highly encourage you to follow Shane and Paul on your socials. So that'll be really good. So I do listen to your stuff, guys, and I think it's quite valuable.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, likewise, Ed. Encourage our listeners also jump on board and listen to Unplugged and IIoT podcasts with Ed and Phil. They talk about a whole bunch of different things in that space, industrial automation space. So yeah, I'm sure you're going to learn a bunch.
Yeah, so don't forget to like and subscribe and rate this podcast 5-star.
Indeed. And cheers, lads.
Cheers.
Cheers.